Hello beautiful souls, this is an upgrade to the previous videos that I've done on ready-made molds, homemade molds, and clay. Since then, I've done things differently that makes the clay come out easier out of the handmade molds. You will see new tips and techniques here on this video. So let's get started. So as you can see here, this is how in the beginning of the video, I showed the frame that Sonia has sent me. And this is the original design. And this is how it came out with the clay. And I can't show you the original anymore because I altered it. So I'm going to show you how I altered it. So here is the altered version of this original one. I ended up cutting off these parts here and this part here. I kept this part here intact. And then I had other molds, you know, they had scrolls, and I fit them in here. And then these are resin pieces that I have in my stash, and I just added them here, and then I added this here. And I still kept the original clay, you know, the clay piece that I added here to make it thicker. And then I had to, of course, add some more clay because since I cut this off, I ended up adding this piece back here. And then and then since it had quite a bit of a gap in here, I filled it in with hot glue. So you can take another object and enhance it, turn it into something entirely different. It's still a frame, but now it looks Victorian, and this is what they look like. So here I cut out the middle, and here I kept the middle. Isn't it beautiful? It turned out really beautiful. It looks ugly here because of all the colors, but then when you mold it, this is why I didn't want to, you know, make a mold on camera out of this first, because look how huge it turned out. It's huge. It really is. And this was like almost, it was more than, this is the tube, and it took more than half of it. I used more than half to create just one of these. Okay, so that's how that turned out, and as you can see, this is how this turned out. I even went ahead and took off these parts here on this one here, and this is a homemade clay, and I will have a video on that. You know, that will be on probably on the third video. So in the last video, I left you off in how I prepare an object that I'm going to mold, a thin object. If the object is not thin at all, you do not have to do you do not have to do the steps that I did in the previous video. And in this video, I will show you how to make your own mold. So if you have an object that's already, you know, thick enough that it's not too thin, then you can skip that first step altogether. Okay, we're going to make a mold out of this little heart right here. Because it's small, it's not going to be as time consuming as those other ones you just saw. And I'm going to show you this tip that I'm using now, where when you create your molds, you have to have extra silicone on the edges, you know, big enough, and that's what's going to help you pop these pieces out. And I purposefully chose one that has this hole in the middle for a reason, and you will see that reason. So I'm going to show you the ingredients that I'll be using here. I learned this is not my own original idea. I've learned this years ago here on YouTube. You know, there's several videos on how to make your own molds using the same ingredients that I'll be using today. However, there are other videos where there's a technique that's used with water and soap, and that's it, just the water and soap and the silicone here. I have not tried that one yet. I've been doing it the way that I'm going to show you today for years, and it's worked for me fine, and it was a trial and error, and there is no there is no measuring. And so we this is all guesstimation. There is no measuring. Anyway, so you're gonna need a caulk gun, which looks like this, because that's how we're gonna squeeze this out. There they have some that look like that looks like a toothpaste, you know, packaging, or you know, where you get your toothpaste out of, you know what I mean. They have those, but I don't use those. I use these, and it has to be clear. It has to say clear, and it has to say 100% silicone, and it has to say clear. Okay, and this I get from my local hardware store here. You could also get this from Home Depot. Okay, the next thing you're gonna need, well, the other things you're gonna need is, I have baby oil in this bottle, so you know we only need a few drops. So baby oil, cornstarch, and any color acrylic paint. You don't have to, but if you don't, it's gonna be a little bit like transparent. It's actually going to be like a cloudy white, you know, because of the cornstarch. The cornstarch has color, but I like to color mine, as you can see here. I either do it in the pink, or I do it like in a light blue. And you're going to need the smallest amount, especially when you're doing small pieces. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open this up. Excuse my arm. So we're gonna there's a hole here. I don't know if they all have them, where you stick this in, and then it's supposed to cut it for you. I don't use it because, as you can see, it doesn't really work for me. So I just tend to take a utility knife. You can do it with an X-Acto knife, and it just comes right off. Okay, and then there's this little thing here on the caulking gun. This is still sealed. Just because I opened it here, it doesn't mean that it's open. There's a seal there that has to be broken. So you have to open it really well, otherwise you're going to have a tough time pushing the silicone through. Okay, that's pretty much opened there. You can use gloves if you want. I don't ever use gloves, and maybe I should, but I just don't, because I need to feel the silicone. Okay, then there's a lever here. You push this back. Hold on, let me do this. And then you stick your silicone in there, and then you pump. And then you're going to start seeing it coming out here a little bit. Okay, well, I'm not going to push it all the way through yet. So, like I said, there's no measurements. So this is fairly small. I'm going to say maybe a little bit more. I used a lot of cornstarch when I was making those big ones, those big frames. I think this should be good. Okay, let me see. So then you start squeezing the caulk out, the silicone out. And I think I'm gonna need a little bit more. This might be a little too much, but I don't know, but I'd rather have a little bit more than a little bit less, because once you start mixing this up, it's gonna start to harden. So I'm just doing a few drops. You don't need a lot of the baby oil. And then I'm just gonna put the smallest amount of, just a tiny bit like that, of acrylic of the color of your choice. I'm going to start mixing. I am going to put my hands on this, but not yet, because it's going to stick to me like there's no tomorrow. And this will stick to the bottom of your container, no matter even if it's a ceramic, aluminum, plastic, it really doesn't matter. And you don't want to use the containers that you put your food in. If you're going to continue to make molds, I highly suggest you dedicate a container just for this. Okay, it's still sticky. It's still pretty soft. This does harden. This is not like the liquid silicone where it takes like 8 hours to cure. This takes about 15 minutes. No lie. It really is quick. I hope this was enough. OMG. I guess if this is getting a little bit harder, you can tell, you know, by the by the resistance. It's getting a little bit more harder, but I'm not going to pick it up just yet. I think this is pretty good, and I'm going to, oh, there's a piece here still, and I am going to put some cornstarch here because I need to place the when I'm getting ready to mold this, I need a flat surface. I think this is ready, so I'm going to add some cornstarch in my hands because it still can be very sticky. It's not sticking to me yet because I still have cornstarch in my hands. I'm starting to feel sticky in my hands. You don't want it where it's too hard because it's not going to imprint very well. You want it as soft as it can be, but without sticking so much to your hands. That's the consistency you want. Okay. It's starting to stick to my hands, but I'm going to leave it like that. So the object here now is I'm going to flatten around the edges. Like that's perfect right there, but I'm going to make it even wider. So this is the new thing that I discovered in making handmade molds. I want to create wings. I want this to be a little bit bigger, and you want the middle to be risen and the ends to be flatter, because the thinner it is, the more flexible it is. So this is what I discovered. And I'm going to flatten it out here a little bit. Not too much because I don't want this to go all the way through, but deep enough. Yeah, this was a lot, but I'd rather have it like this and have my wings. Okay, make sure it's smooth there. And I'm gonna press in my object, and the middle part will rise, and that's fine. But you want to make sure your edges, the mold around the edge of your object, is the same height as your object. We're not gonna concern ourselves with that lump just yet. So this is what I discovered, okay? So creating wings, making the mold that's a lot wider than the object creates these wings, and this is what helps pop out the clay. See how more flexible that is? As to before, when I was doing it, it wasn't as it was flexible, but not as flexible as I'm doing them now. And it's even flexible this way. So I can pop this way and I can pop this way. You still will have to put your clay in the freezer, especially when you have thin areas like this. Okay, so that's the new technique that I'm doing now, that I discovered. So I'm gonna give this time to harden even more, and we'll remove the object, and then we'll do the next step. Yeah, so after I did finish the video, I realized that I did leave something out, so I'm throwing this into the video right now. And then, yeah, so the other thing that I wanted to mention is, you know, I mentioned how I make my molds where it has wings now, right? Well, this is a ready-made mold that I bought on AliExpress, and the edges were really thin here. Like, this is from where this is to the edge of this, the silicone, the blue silicone is, that's how wide the edge is for this. And it was difficult for me to pop out the clay from here. This is a rose. And so what I did was I did the same mixture that I did for, you know, to create the mold. I did the same mixture. I just took out a little bit and did the cornstarch, yada yada yada, mixed it up, and then I just added it to this, and now I have wings here, and it makes it so much easier to pop out. So if I have, you know, the original molds that I had created, if the edges are not wide enough where it's difficult for me to pop out, I'm gonna actually do the same thing to those. So that's another tip. So if you have a silicone mold that the edges are thin and it's a little bit difficult for you to get your hands in there to pop out the clay without distorting the clay, do the mixture, you know, do a little bit of the mixture and just add it to here, because remember, only silicone sticks to silicone. This acts like a glue for it, and this is not coming out. Like, you can try as hard as you want and it's not going to come out. And I see that I didn't fill this in properly, but that's okay. I could even take the regular silicone, you know, without doing any mixture, and just taking a little bit out and adding it, oopsie, and adding it right there, and it'll stick right back on. But as you can see here, nothing else is coming off. So that's what's gonna help you create these wings. So that's another tip for your molds that don't have enough wings to pull out your clay. Okay, so it's been like only like 10 minutes and it's already like, it's ready to go. This is why I put cornstarch on my surface, and I suggest don't use a silicone mat, because this will definitely bond to the silicone mat, because silicone only bonds to silicone. I should have said that in the beginning of the video, but you know, sometimes it will stick here. But if you put cornstarch down, you still might get a little bit of sticking here and there, but not as much. Okay, so this is pretty much ready. And now, see, this still needs curing time because it's still a little bit, you know, it's pretty much still flexible. And there goes the imprint. You probably won't be able to see it very well on camera. Okay, so the next technique is when I did you know, videos, this was I think in 2017, when I did a segment on ready-made molds, handmade molds, and the different kind of clays. Well, I showed how to put clay in here with this in the middle, and you know, and I removed it easily, even though with this in the middle. So when I remove the clay, of course the clay has that space here, that open space. So here I'm going to show you a much better way to do this. I even do this with my ready-made molds, the molds that I buy already made from China. I end up cutting off this middle part here. And you're going to do this with any kind of mold that has an opening in the center. This was a much more efficient and way of releasing your clay out of your ready-made molds and your handmade molds. So this is what I discovered. And this is still leveled with this, so I'm gonna cut it even lower than that. So the objective here is to make sure this part is lower than this part up here. Okay, now I'm going to use air dry clay. You can do this with polymer clay, air dry clay, homemade clays, but I'm going to use this air dry clay that I love. And I recently discovered how to make homemade clay, which is even more economical. So this is the air dry clay I use, Model Air. There's another clay that I haven't, that Ginger from Ginger Pana here on YouTube has sent me. It's also an air dry clay, but the consistency when it dries is different. It almost feels like foam. This one still feels like, you know, like it's like a porcelain or ceramic texture when it dries. I'm just going to go ahead and use one of my paint brushes here. I'm going to add a little bit of cornstarch. I even do this with polymer clay. You don't really have to, but I do it because it does make it release even better. Okay, so I'm going to add... If you overlap, you know, if it overlaps, you could always cut those parts off, you know, trim them off with an X-Acto knife, or when it's dry, you can just sand it off. Okay, let me put this part back. Okay. So normally I put this in the freezer, but because this is still kind of soft, really soft, I don't have to. Okay, so there's my clay. As you can see, I do have an overhang. I could easily just trim that off. Okay, now I'm just going to cut out the center, and that way it doesn't deform, because when you have a frame that's hollow in the middle, that has no middle, and you try to take it off your mold, it can distort the shape of your frame. And then if you still have, you know, some clay in there, when it dries, you can sand off the inside. There it is, and it didn't distort, and you can see all the details in there. There you have it. So that's the new technique that I'm using now, and the fact that I'm making it a little bit bigger and more slimmer, so it could be a lot more flexible. So that I did with this. See how I left the center here? And then I also, when I removed it out of the mold, then I went ahead and cut it out in the middle. This is another tip and trick or technique. When you have molds that are a little bit thin, you know, like the object is going to come out a little bit thin. Like this was really thin. Well, the alternative is that you can still mold your air dry clay. This is ideal for resin. This will be better for resin. But I used air dry clay to see if I can come up with an, you know, with a way where when it's thin, you know, that I could still use it with the air dry clay. Here, as you can see, I did cut off the centers of this so that I can cut out in the middle of the clay, as you already saw. Okay, this one is a little thin too. This one, I think it's okay. That one is fine. So what I've done is I put the air dry clay here. You know, I took it out as carefully as I could, and then I poked the holes, you know, to mimic the where your fingers go in the scissors. And then once it dried, this is what I did. So I'm going to use this as an example because this is a little thin also. So I went ahead and I filled this up again. I didn't fill it up like all the way to the top. And I know this, oh, that's the wrong one. It's this one here. I didn't fill it where it was all the way to the top of the mold. I did it enough. I know that these pieces shrink a little bit. Air dry clay shrinks as it dries, depending on how thin or thick it is. So I didn't fill this all the way to the top, but I filled it where it covers the entire shape of the scissors. So I went and did that. I put it right back on top of here. You're going to get the impression on the other side too. It might go away depending on, oh, as a matter of fact, let me wet this a little bit. So I'm just taking a little water here and wetting that so that it creates, you know, like a bond or a glue. And I'm just gonna blend in the seams. It's basically what you want. You want something a little bit more substantial. Okay. If you don't want to do this, I would suggest using resin for the thinner pieces here. But this is an alternative, and it's just an extra step. And then of course you cut out the middle part here. Once this dries, if you want a cleaner circle, what you do is you take sandpaper that's like this, not like a nail file or anything like that, not like this, but you take sandpaper like this, and then you can roll it up. You know, you cut out yourself a piece. This is a fine one. This one is, it doesn't give the number, but it's a fine sandpaper, and then you roll it up. And you cut out a piece, you know, you cut it out, and then you go in between there, you know, to smooth it out like this. That's how I do it. So that's another tip right there. So once this dries, I will do that. But look how much substantial that is. A lot thicker. So that's another tip. Okay. And now you have a piece that's more sturdier, a clay piece that's more sturdier. That's what I did with this little one as well. It's a little bit more substantial, sturdier. It's thicker. I haven't done it to this one yet. I won't do it to this one. This one is fine. This one is okay. So there you have it. There it is. I finally did a video on how to make your own mold. So with that being said, let's share, be fair, be filled with love, and love one another. Take good care, everybody.